Kevin McAleenan, welcome to Fox News Sunday.
Good to see you, Bret.
Mr. Secretary, we heard the specifics there in David's piece, but how much of this is new?
All of it is new. I mean, we've heard commitments before from Mexico to do more on their southern border. The last time they deployed down there, it's about 400 or 500 officers. This is more than a tenfold commitment to increase their security in Chiapas. That's where people are entering from Guatemala in southern Mexico.
Your predecessor, Secretary Nielsen, testified that these things were happening. To the House Judiciary Committee, there were talks about moving National Guard troops to the southern border with Guatemala. You're saying this is different than that?
It's very different. The president put a charge in this whole dialogue with Mexico, with the tariff threat, brought them to the table. The foreign minister from Mexico arrived within hours. He arrived the next day with real proposals on the table. This is the first time we've heard anything like this kind of number of law enforcement being deployed in Mexico to address migration, not just at their southern border, but also on the transportation routes to the northern border and in coordinated patrols in key areas along our southwest border.
The president tweeted this morning that any stories that said that this was not new, as you're saying, are false. But he said there are some important things not mentioned in yesterday's press release. One in particular.
Yeah, so the president tweeted out that the tariff has been suspended. Secretary Mnuchin pointed out that there's a mechanism to make sure that they do what they've promised to do, that there's an actual result, that we see a vast reduction in those numbers. And as the State Department announced, there are going to be further actions, further dialogue with Mexico on immigration, on how to manage this asylum flow in the region, which is, a small percentage of the total flow. This is, by and large, an economic migration that we need to stop with enforcement. We need to be able to repatriate people successfully.
So is the administration's point of view that this tactic worked as far as this threat of tariffs? You have the Speaker of the House with a release that says threats and temper tantrums are no way to negotiate foreign policy. You're saying that this threat worked?
People can disagree with the tactics. Mexico came to the table with real proposals. We have an agreement that, if they implement, will be effective.
I want to talk about the specifics. A quote from administration, the Customs and Border official says, "We are bursting at the seams. It's unsustainable and can't continue." These numbers,
right.
Can you put them in context for people at home?
So we had two prior surges of families and children at the border, 2014 and 2016. At that time, President Obama called it a humanitarian crisis. In the last 2 months alone, we have more than doubled those 2 full years of crisis. So to give you a sense of how many people are crossing the border, 144,000 last month. When I was in Guatemala last week, a man came up to me and said, "Hey, we know that bringing a child is a passport for migration to the United States. The smugglers are advertising it. This flow is not going to stop without coordinated efforts with Mexico, but also we still need Congress to act. We still need help both on the fundamental legal loopholes in the framework, but also on funding to manage this situation that you heard about from CBP.
But specifically on the asylum law, you need Congress to change it.
No question. We need 3 specific changes in law. One, we're not able to detain families through an immigration proceeding. We have to release them within 20 days by court order. That needs to change. Families can be held together in an appropriate setting for a fair and transparent hearing. And then they can be repatriated if they don't have an asylum claim. That's one. 2, we want to be able to repatriate unaccompanied children, just like we do in Mexico and Canada, even if they're from Central America or further away, but also offer children a safe way to apply for asylum in country. That's a balanced policy that we'd like to implement. And 3, we need to change the asylum standard so that front bar, where we assign credible fear, is not so automatic, so that 85–90% of people get that, while only 10% get asylum at the end of a court proceeding. We need to align that more closely with what might actually be a successful claim.
Last year, the administration separated more than 2,500 children from parents as part of this policy to prosecute anyone caught crossing into the United States illegally.
Right.
How many separations are there now?
So now, both under the President's executive order from June 20th last year and court order, separations occur when they're in the interest of the safety of the child. A serious criminal prosecution unrelated to the unlawful crossing, communicable disease, an emergency situation where we have to bring the child or parent to the hospital. These are the kind of circumstances we're seeing. And then very sadly and very tragically, situations where there's abuse and where a child's safety is threatened by the adult they're traveling with.
So the Inspector General found that there's dangerous overcrowding and unsanitary conditions at processing facilities along the border. Is that still the case?
That's absolutely the case. I testified to that in December of last year, and since then we've more than doubled the number of crossings. I went down in March 27th and said we have a crisis, that we're at the breaking point of the border. We don't have room for the people arriving. We asked Congress 5.5 weeks ago for supplemental funding to manage this overcrowding concern and get Health and Human Services the money they need to take unaccompanied children expeditiously. We have seen no action on those requests.
You're the acting Homeland Security Secretary. How much time do you spend on this as opposed to Homeland Security overall?
Yeah. So DHS is a multi-mission department. We've got to stay on our toes. We're preparing for hurricane season. I was with the Vice President in Oklahoma looking at the disaster and FEMA's response on Tuesday from the flooding. We have to do it all. We had a big election security set of briefings on Friday, and we're going to maintain momentum there. But this is a crisis, and a crisis means that management time and leadership effort has to be focused on that. I'm getting good support from across the cabinet, and obviously the President of the United States is dialed in and focused on this issue every single day and trying to make sure that we can secure that border and change this dynamic.
You mentioned elections. Is that moving forward? Do you feel comfortable that come election time that the U.S. is going to be secure?
I think we've got a great strategy, working with all 50 states, trying to get to all 8,800 jurisdictions that oversee elections at the local level. This is just like a FEMA-style management structure. Federal government supports states and local governments that administer this, and we've got great tools to help them prepare, to make sure their systems are ready, to make sure there's been no intrusions, and to help educate on new threats and new emerging challenges in the cyber world.
Mr. Secretary, we appreciate your time.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Well, joining me here now, Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson. He's the chair of the